The surge of deals being announced to kick off free agency has now subsided as teams have had a second to take a step back and make some real decisions from here. With these max guys getting this attention paid to them right off the rip, there has been a little bit of a gap in where that middle ground of the NBA is and kind of a stalemate in the movement for now. But in the meantime, we have seen a number of Sixers players and key contributors from last year's roster be picked up by opposing teams that I do want to acknowledge there. The Sixers still have plenty of work to do on their overall roster, and to dive in that specifically, currently on roster, there is Joel Embiid, Paul George, Tyrese Maxey, Kelly Oubre, Paul Reed, Andre Drummond, Eric Gordon, and Ricky Council IV. And while there's a fine start for the roster, I do want to acknowledge some of the guys that no longer will be with this team. Now, before I get into that, I do want to note that non-guarantee next to Paul Reed and Ricky Council IV is pretty notable, particularly that $7.7 million that is attached to Paul Reed, as it is looking increasingly likely that he will not be back with the team next year. Now, part of the reason for that is the Sixers are trying to use that as a key salary piece that you could potentially trade Paul Reed. A team could cut him and wipe that from their cap space. It is a money-saving move on their end, and he's still a desirable player in a lot of locations. That while his shortcomings are here, and I think the writing was on the wall when there was the drafting of Adam Bona, who has a lot of similarities to Paul Reed's style, and then bringing in Andre Drummond in free agency, it does feel like that is destined to happen in the near future. But for now, Paul Reed does remain on the roster. There are a couple guys who that is no longer the case. To start with, we got the notification that De'Anthony Melton is signing a one-year, $12.8 million deal with the Golden State Warriors. Now, I'm appreciative of the time that De'Anthony Melton spent here in Philadelphia. I do think that was a really good move by the Sixers, who ultimately shipped off a 23rd overall pick to land De'Anthony Melton, as well as Danny Green for the financial side of things there. Melton was a plus guard for this team for a few years now. He was a great complement to Maxey. His defensive ability brought out the best and allowed Maxey to grow in that area as well. But in all reality, the injury risk was just too large to commit that type of money. And that $12.8 million is clearly, in Melton's mind, a little bit of a prove-it deal where he will seek some more long-term money in a long-term situation next offseason. If he is healthy, I do think he can help that Warriors team, and I will be rooting for Melton. But I do think from the Sixers' perspective that it was the right call to let him walk, as that is just too much of a monetary risk to pay to a guy who obviously has some shortcomings, has missed plenty of time with the back. And also, I think the Sixers are right to commit to this tactic of having long defenders, having tall guys from top to bottom on this roster outside of Tyrese Maxey and Jared McCain there, and having a backcourt trio of Jared McCain, Tyrese Maxey, and De'Anthony Melton. I think it's just too small to be fully successful there. Now, a guy that I'm a little bit more upset about that did move on, it is Niko Batum here. That ultimately he agreed to a 2-year, $9.6 million with the Los Angeles Clippers. This came a little bit after a report surfaced that he had no interest in returning to the Sixers here. I love Niko Batum. I think he was great for the Sixers team. I think he's far more impactful than the numbers do overall indicate there. But the reality is that there's a human being side to this. And Batum liked having his family out in LA, liked living out there, and that is the driving force for this. I give that full respect. I understand that. You got to accept that as the case, and you could tell that he really had no desire to be here when he was traded to Philadelphia. And to Batum's credit, he treated things like the consummate professional and was a real plus asset for the Sixers team. They do not win that playing game against the Miami Heat without him when he went off for a barrage of three-pointers. He was also terrific guarding Jalen Brunson in that first round of the playoffs, particularly in the first two games. So I give Batum a lot of love and is a guy that I think should get a warm reception when he does make his Philadelphia return. And it did not stop there for the Los Angeles Clippers, as they also picked off Mo Bamba from the Sixers roster. And Mo Bamba, another incredibly frustrating player in my mind here. He's a guy who, despite having a near 8-foot wingspan and a 9'6" standing reach, really struggles to rebound the basketball and protect the rim, which are two of the biggest, most necessary skills as a center. Essentially, at this point, Mo Bamba has turned himself into like a pick-and-pop three-point shooter, and he's going to have his games where he knocks down a couple threes, and you overall feel good about the minutes he provided, and then he'll have the nights where he does not knock down those threes, and he basically brings nothing to the table there. It was a worthwhile roll of the dice for the Sixers to bring in Mo Bamba, stylistically see what that player could bring out, that adding some more shooting at the 5-out position was intriguing and I think worth a shot, but ultimately, he just did not play himself into a reliable role, and I thought it was really telling even during the period of time when Joel Embiid was hurt. that Paul Reed still kind of ended up winning up the backup center job. And that's even with Bamba starting a significant amount of games. I think Nick Nurse really didn't like either of his options there, to be perfectly clear. And that is why there's two new ones in Andre Drummond and Adam Bona there. And I did mention Andre Drummond just to take a look at where he stands up statistically here. We're talking about last year with Chicago, him averaging 8.4 points, 9.0 rebounds, shot 55.6 from the field. Also ranked in the 100th percentile in offensive rebounding rate and defensive rebounding rate. His rebounding numbers have gotten even better since he has left Philadelphia, and that's been kind of his calling card as a player there. So shout out to Andre Drummond. Definitely welcome back to Philly, and excited to see what he brings on the floor there. Now, the biggest name and the biggest financial commitment that is made by a former Sixer or to a former Sixer, it goes in the direction of the Detroit Pistons in a move that I think we could have, seen coming for a little bit now, and that is Tobias Harris leaving to join the Detroit Pistons on a 2-year, $52 million deal. Tobias, where do I start? For starters, I don't want to rag on the guy too hard, as I do feel that in general, the biggest thing is the Sixers made the mistake by offering him this massive contract. That the reality is the Sixers paid him an amount of money that his talent could not live up to. Now, that doesn't mean he was any less frustrating as a player, that I still will forever flinch at the pump fake out of three-pointers just to dribble his way into a tough contested two, how he operates in too similar of a space to Joel Embiid, how he's a guy who is not good enough as a primary option as a scorer to be a primary option on a winning team. He's also so bad at the complementary skills of getting loose balls, of defending, of rebounding at a high level. The way that he can't slide his feet on the perimeter and how stiff his hips seem when there is an athletic guard in front of him. A lot of frustrating stuff with Tobias Harris. But I will say, I'm just happy that it's over, that the Sixers did survive, and for what it's worth, opening night will be the first game since 2019 in which Joel Embiid is suiting up without Tobias Harris on roster, and the first game of his entire career that he is suiting up without either Tobias Harris or Jahlil Okafor on roster. Now, that is very, very a poor look on the Sixers franchise there, but ultimately it is over there. So shout out to Tobias. I won't be wishing as much ill will on him as I'm sure others will, but man, let's also not brush over the last time we saw this guy on a basketball court. He was scoring 0 points in Game 6 elimination game there. So tough look for Tobias, and best wishes in Detroit. I do believe he is fulfilling his basketball destiny of pouring in empty calorie statistics on a below 500 team that has no chance of contending. But nonetheless, we are focused on the Sixers team who does have a chance at contending. And to take a look at some of the free agents available, I do want to note that there are some guys. And shout out to Harrison Grimm of Liberty Ballers, who tweeted out some names to keep an eye out. Some remaining free agents that actually make sense for the Sixers. He lists Buddy Hield, which is interesting if we would kick the tires on Buddy for another season. Malik Beasley, Kyle Anderson, Gary Trent Jr., Caleb Martin, Gordon Hayward, Taurean Prince, Kyle Lowry, Cam Payne, or Terry Johnson, depending on who you ask, Dennis Smith Jr., Joe Ingles, Jay Crowder, KJ Martin, and Robert Covington. So a lot of intriguing names there, and obviously some former Sixers. I will add a couple notes of context here that it does seem really likely that KJ Martin is going to be back on an inflated contract, and the primary reason for that is as a future trade chip, that they do hold his bird rights at a minimum value, and the Sixers do have a chance that this is a move that when you see that notification, assuming it happens, don't expect this is a significant commitment to KJ Martin, just a bit of from the finances that it works. So he's going to be signing a pretty penny, probably above what his pay grade is, but ultimately will be for a future trade that will involve Martin and whatever amount of first-round picks for that final move the Sixers do need. So it does seem like he'll be back for the beginning of the season, but likely not the end there. Now to talk a little bit about the players that were added to this team as far as replacements. When speaking about a potential De'Anthony Melton replacement, I do think Eric Gordon's the clearest guy to acknowledge here, and he's coming off a season in which he averaged 11 points per game, 1.8 assists, 2.0 rebounds, or 1.8 rebounds, 2.0 assists, shot 44.3% from the field, 37.8% from three, 41.3% from the corner. He's willing to shoot it from way deep. That he's a guy like is kind of the antithesis of Buddy Hield. That the concern with Buddy was a less willing trigger, and he kind of needed that right toe on the line to up 3-point range. That he was not a guy that's going to bomb it from deep. That is Eric Gordon, and I will say that especially in the younger parts of his career, and definitely I saw it last year. I was kind of surprised too. Is he was a guy who's attacking off the dribble a little bit more and really just improving the full scheme of his offense in a way that I don't think we've seen in a couple years from Gordon, particularly in those Rockets system. He didn't really have a chance to showcase that, in which, James Harden was just dribbling the life out of the basketball for stretches of times there. I also did mention Andre Drummond, and I touched on his stats there, as he will be a difference maker as the big man position. And ultimately, all this is pointing to for this guy to be available. But this is about Paul George at 22.6 points per game, 5.2 rebounds, 3.5 assists, 47.1% from the field, 41.3% from three, 45.7% on corner threes, 6'8", a real deal wing, a guy that is still a top 25 NBA player by every definition of it, a guy that you can make the argument is a top 15 player still, and we will see what type of season that he does have, but that is the reason all this sacrifice was done. So while these type of role players, these Sixers still need to find a way to fill out and complete the roster, ultimately this is about adding the top-end talent, and that is the goal that is accomplished there. So it is a small price to pay to allow other teams to pick off the Mo Bambas of the world, the Nico Batums of the world, the Tobias Harris, the De'Anthony Meltons, and frankly, Niko Batum is the guy that I'm the most upset about by a pretty significant margin here. I do wish that he was back, and I will note here from everything I've heard, this had nothing to do with the Sixers not wanting him back. This had everything to do with Batum just wanting to go back to Los Angeles, that if there was mutual interest in Batum returning, I do think that would have been the case. But ultimately, you got to live where you want to and all those types of conversation points there. But still a lot of work to be done as the active roster, only with 8 players on it, and as I mentioned, one of them most likely not returning there. So Daryl Morey still got to keep cooking. It will be interesting to see what the next moves are from here. What we're really seeing in kind of this age where the CBA is really controlling some decisions for what teams are making, some long-term financial considerations coming into play, that really being the driving force of why the Clippers did refuse to match the contract that Paul George desired from them there, that we're seeing a little bit of this money dry up, that currently we're seeing these the big-ticket guys get their money, and the rest of the players are kind of holding out, where they have minimums waved in front of their faces, teams begging for them to take them, and they want a little bit more money. So until that full pot of money in the middle from each of these teams dries up, I do expect players to hold out from negotiating for teams for a little bit, so we might hit a couple days stalemate in this free agency race. Ultimately, we will see what happens there, but I will be on top of everything right here on Sixers Digest. So make sure you do smash that subscribe button if you have not already. Drop a like on this video, and let me know any comments you have. Who out of those 4 or any other players that are set to leave will be your biggest miss for the Sixers team? Who do you not want to see in another opposing uniform next year? I think so far, very happy that Kelly Oubre is back. That I think a lot of people are on the same page for that one. But let me know if you have any other names that you have in mind for that. I'll be talking with you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.